Montana's national park looks peaceful from a distance. The tall ridges form soft outlines against the sky, and the wide basins hold a quiet that feels older than the trails that cross them. The air moves slowly here, carrying the same calm sound through every season. Yet, behind this stillness, a long list of missing hikers has formed. Their cases stretch across decades, appearing in different years, but always in the same quiet spaces near ridges that lose echoes, trails that shift slightly, and deep basins where radios stop without warning. Rangers describe sudden moments when sound falls away, footprints end on flat ground, or thin mist rises even when the weather is clear. None of these events explain the disappearances on their own, but taken together, they create a slow pattern one that sits quietly beneath the surface of the park, waiting for anyone who steps too far inside. The ridgeline that watches back. The northern stretch of Montana's national park looks peaceful from far away. The ridges rise in slow shapes, and the quiet in the basins settles like a low blanket. Visitors often say the silence here feels heavier than in other parks, almost like the forest is listening. Rangers say that once you step deeper inside, the sound changes, the wind softens. The rivers lose their usual echo. Even footsteps land differently. People who hike far into the interior describe a pressure around their ears. They compare it to standing in a sealed room. It is in this quiet, inside the long shadows of stone and pine, where a slow pattern of disappearances has formed. The first known case in this particular region goes back to 1976. It appears only in a short ranger memo called Unresolved Backcountry Absence. The memo offers little detail, but it carries a faint sense of unease. In June 1994, a man named Robert Hensley signed the Bowman Lake trail log at 9:12 a.m. He wrote only 2 words: North Ridge. When searchers followed his path the next day, they found nothing disturbed. No prints, no marks, no broken branches. A helicopter unit circled the ridge twice and reported no bright colours, no movement, and no sign of a fall. In the search log, one ranger wrote, "Hard to hear the wind here." It was the only personal note in the entire file. Everything else stayed clinical, but that single line suggested something they did not know how to describe. Another case appeared in 2003. Julia and Mark Reynolds, 2 hikers from Billings, camped near an area older maps call Wolf Spine Bend. A photo found on their camera shows the long ridge under a grey sky. The last video clip on the device lasts only 5 seconds. Birds chirp at the start. Then the audio drops into sudden silence, as if the microphone stopped working. The camera was found zipped inside their tent. Their packs were neatly arranged, their stove untouched. Rangers noted that nothing showed signs of struggle or animal activity. It looked like they simply stepped out and were absorbed by the stillness. Some rangers mentioned strange patches inside the forest where radios lose signal even at short range. The official line blames steep rocks and heavy tree cover, yet several searchers described these places as pockets where sound stays close to the ground. A veteran ranger named Dale Mercer once pointed toward a junction near Hidden Creek and said, "That spot eats echoes." He said that when he stepped inside, everything felt muted, even though he could hear his boots striking the dirt. That same area appears in multiple disappearance reports from different decades. No file draws a direct link, but the pattern sits quietly on the map. In 2011, a volunteer searcher named Harold Lawn wrote an unusual detail in his field notes. He said he saw a thin column of dust rise straight up from the ground, even though the air was still. When he returned to that spot 10 minutes later with a ranger, the soil looked untouched. Samples taken from that area tested normal. Lawn later said he felt a tightening around his ears at that moment, the same sensation other hikers had described. His written remarks said only, "Ridge feels like it's waiting." Several hikers have reported a faint metallic smell in certain areas. One visitor, Daniel Foster, noticed it near a narrow pass west of Granite Peak in August 2017. He described it as iron mixed with cold water. He said it arrived without wind and disappeared as quickly as it came. When he mentioned the scent to a ranger, the ranger replied, "Others say that too." These accounts appear in scattered visitor statements, never in official reports. The 2019 disappearance of one 9-year-old student, Erin Pace, brought new attention to the region. Erin sent a final message that read, "Signal keeps dropping." Her phone pinged once more at 10:41 a.m. Searchers later found a single impression in the foliage a mile from that location. It looked like a heavy object had been set down and lifted again. No tracks led to or away from the spot. A search dog circled the area repeatedly, unable to choose a direction. The handler said he wasn't alert, he seemed unsure of the ground. Older residents from nearby towns share stories from decades before the park was mapped. A retired guide named Warren Cole, who lived most of his life in Polebridge, said that hunters avoided certain valleys long before word of disappearances became public. He said those valleys felt watched from the ridge. When asked what that meant, Cole paused before saying, "The weight in the trees isn't from snow." His words matched the tone of later ranger notes, quiet hints placed between the lines. A weather log from 1982 holds a brief remark written by an intern named Helena Sand. On a page tracking wind speed, she wrote, "Strange stillness from 2:14 to 2:18 p.m. Trees did not sway, though readings stayed high." She underlined the entry twice. Weather logs rarely include personal comments, making her note stand out. The location she listed matches the same ridge system seen in several recent disappearance files. The log offers no explanation. Despite the long record of missing hikers, the park continues its standard operations. Most visitors walk the trails without seeing or hearing anything unusual. Still, rangers sometimes speak quietly about moments when the forest feels different for reasons they cannot name. One ranger said during a recorded interview, "You can walk here for years and the land stays normal. Then one day, the sound cuts off in a way you can't explain." The pattern across these events is slow. Nothing moves in an obvious way. It hides between the quiet moments where a radio drops, where smell arrives without wind, where dust rises without motion, where footsteps do not echo. Nothing appears directly. The land simply records small signs and leaves them untouched for whoever comes next. The cold basin without echo. The lower valleys of Montana's national park have a quiet that feels different from the upper ridges. The trees here grow close together, forming long corridors of shade where the sun only reaches the ground in thin lines. Hikers often say the air feels older in these basins, as if it has stayed in place for a long time. Rangers describe the sound here as soft but incomplete. They say certain parts of the valley do not reflect noise in the way forests usually do. A person can clap, call out, or speak clearly, and the sound seems to stop a short distance away. These small pockets of silence have been recorded in several search logs, though never in the official reports. The descriptions appear in side notes, margin comments, and brief statements from volunteers who walked these paths during missing hiker cases. One of the earliest references to this strange acoustic behavior comes from a 1989 search for a hiker named Thomas Avery. Avery, a four-year-old photographer, entered the basin near Alder Ridge to capture morning light. His last known photograph shows thin fog above the ground and a small cluster of trees that appear slightly distorted by the moisture. The search team led by Ranger Logan Hart reached the basin the next day. Hart later wrote in his own notebook, Calls do not travel here. Voice dies fast. His words were not included in the public summary, but were kept in his personal notes, found years later during an archive update. In 2004, another case brought attention to the same region. A group of college hikers from Missoula entered the basin for a simple day loop. One of them, a 2-year-old named Kevin Morris, walked ahead to check a small stream. When the others reached the creek minutes later, he was gone. They searched the immediate area and shouted his name. One member of the group later said, "The sound felt swallowed." Search dogs brought into the basin hesitated at the same creek crossing. Their handlers noted strange pauses, as if the dogs were listening for something that never arrived. The most detailed acoustic observation came during the 2012 search for a park volunteer named Ellen Porter. Porter often surveyed plant growth and soil conditions in remote areas. On June 3rd, she entered a section of the lower valley, marked as Basin, 12 inches Ranger maps. Her check-in radio call was recorded at 8:47 a.m. At 11:02 a.m., her next call failed. Rangers attempted to reach her through a second channel, then through an emergency band. All signals returned static. When the search team entered Basin 12, they noticed something unusual. One ranger, speaking in a low voice for a recorded interview, said, "Our footsteps sounded normal, but our voices didn't. It was like we were speaking into fog." Another ranger, a field tech named Jules Carver, tried using a whistle to test the echo distance. Carver blew the whistle 3 times. The first 2 blasts faded quickly. The third seemed to vanish altogether. Carver later said in the field log, "Never heard it bounce back." That statement is still stored, though it never appeared in the public-facing report. Nothing about wind patterns or land shape fully explains why certain sounds stop before they travel. Weather records also show odd moments that match these acoustic zones. A meteorologist working with the park in 1997, Dr. Annabelle Rhodes, measured temperature shifts inside Basin 12 at different depths. Her notes mention a thin layer of cooler air close to the ground that did not mix with warmer air above it. This kind of layer can sometimes distort sound, but she noted that the effect she observed should not be strong enough to erase echoes entirely. She marked her comments with a question mark and left the explanation open. Visitors have described something similar during peak summer months. A teacher named Samuel Boyd, hiking with his family in 2018, said that when he called to his daughters from across the basin, "My voice just fell flat." His daughters later said they did not hear him, even though they were standing only a short distance away. When they reenacted the call for a ranger at the trailhead, Boyd said he felt the difference immediately. He said the air in the basin felt tight, like it held sound in place. Some locals from the nearby towns have their own stories about these valleys. A resident named Larry Dunham, who has lived in the area since the late 1952, said he grew up hearing warnings from older hunters. They called the basin the place where sound rests. According to Dunham, hunters used to avoid setting camp too deep inside that area because they said they could not hear approaching animals. Dunham said the elders used a simple phrase, "If you cannot hear far, do not stay long." These old sayings never made it into any ranger materials, but their tone matches what modern hikers describe. During a 2020 environmental survey, 2 biologists, Maren Holtz and Dr. Ian Mercer, used portable audio sensors to measure wildlife activity across different parts of the park. Their devices recorded normal levels of ambient sound in most valleys: bird calls, insects, branches shifting. But inside Basin 12, the sensors captured a strange pattern. The outer edges of the basin were active with normal forest sound. The deeper parts showed sudden drops, as if something blocked or absorbed the natural noise. In their raw notes, Holtz wrote, "Sharp quiet pocket in center, odd stillness, needs recheck." Even footprints inside the basin seem inconsistent. During the 2012 search for Porter, rangers reported finding only partial prints indents that stopped abruptly without transitions. One ranger said it looked as if the ground forgot the rest of the step. Soil tests done later showed nothing unusual. The ground was stable, the moisture levels normal, and the vegetation typical for the season. Despite these anomalies, the basin remains an open hiking area. Most visitors pass through without noticing anything unusual. Yet search teams who have worked disappearances in this valley keep mentioning the same simple detail. Their voices do not travel. A ranger, in a brief interview recorded in 2015, said, "In most places, you can shout and hear your own echo come back. In Basin 12, it feels like the trees hold the sound and do not return it. The quiet here does not feel empty. It feels contained, like a bowl of stillness. It shapes the air in a way that makes you speak softer, even without meaning to." Rangers walk carefully inside these valleys. They say the land has its own kind of silence, a silence that does not warn or explain. It only waits. The trail that shifts when no one walks it. Some trails inside Montana's national park follow a clear pattern. They stay straight, hug natural contours, and move around the ridges in predictable lines. But in one section of the western forest, near a place rangers call boundary loop hikers, describe something different. They say the trail feels like it changes shape, not while they watch it, but between one step and the next. The change is never dramatic. It comes in small ways: a bend that feels sharper than it was hours earlier, a fork that seems to appear even though no map shows it, or a tree marker that moves a short distance from where people remember it standing. Rangers have noted this area since the late 1980 seconds, though the comments remain brief and mostly informal. They rarely place these details in official reports. Yet the same quiet pattern appears again and again. In 1988, a hiker named Ron Keller became disoriented while following Boundary Loop. He had walked the trail many times before. That day, he said the path bent left in a way he had never seen. He followed it for several minutes until he reached a dead end where the trees pressed tight. When search teams later retraced his account, the path stopped at the usual place and did not extend beyond it. Keller insisted the ground he walked on had a clear trail shape, packed soil, flattened needles, and a natural curve. Searchers found none of it. In a ranger memo, someone wrote, "Trail does not match witness memory." Another case occurred in 2007 when two hikers from Oregon, Leah, and Marcus Carroll attempted to reach a small overlook marked on their map. They walked for hours, but could not locate it. Leah later said, "The trail signs felt different each time we saw them, like someone moved them a little." She said they never felt lost, only unsure of direction. When they returned to the ranger station, the ranger on duty checked the map and told them the overlook they searched for was only half a mile from where they began. Their GPS logs showed a looping path that circled the same area several times without leading anywhere. The loops were smooth yet unnatural, as if the hikers walked a shape the land itself drew. Search teams have also experienced shifts. In 2015, a group of rangers marking the trail for a missing hiker case placed bright orange tags on branches at regular intervals. When they returned 20 minutes later, 2 of the tags were missing. The branches still showed faint pressure marks where the tape had been tied, but the tags were not on the ground or caught in brush. The ranger leading the team wrote a short note in the margin of his log: "Tape not recovered, unclear removal." During the 1999 search for a man named Eric Dunn, volunteers set small rock markers at a fork to keep track of their path. When they returned along the same route, the markers were scattered in a straight line rather than a small pile. None of the volunteers admitted moving them. No prints surrounded the rocks. One participant noted something else: The trail at the fork seemed wider on their return than it had earlier. He described it as a few feet of extra space that wasn't there before. Soil did not appear freshly disturbed. Maps of the area do not help. Over the years, small adjustments have been made to the Boundary Loop Trail. Each new map shows minor variations in shape and length. A park cartographer in 2011, Eleanor Briggs, left a short note next to her revision. Trail alignment uncertain due to inconsistent field data. Cartographers rarely include phrases like that. Most rely on clear measurements, GPS lines, and marked tree points. Her comment suggests something on the ground did not match the information she gathered. GPS units also behave strangely here. Hikers report drift movement of their digital location even when they stand still. The drift is not large, usually only a few feet, yet the pattern appears repeatedly in user tracks. Several GPS logs show the same small curve forming near mile marker 4, even though the physical trail is straight. One ranger said, "It's like the signal thinks the trail bends even when it doesn't." Engineers who reviewed the logs found no consistent source of interference. The forest canopy is dense but typical for the region. Seasonal workers in the park speak about Boundary Loop with caution. A trail maintenance worker named Gavin Reed said that when he marks the edges of the trail in spring, he sometimes finds the old markers several feet off from where he left them the previous year. He uses metal stakes that should remain stable. He said he cannot explain the shift. In a quiet interview, he added, "Sometimes the trail feels like it wants to move away from you." He said it lightly, but the unease in his tone stood out. Weather does not explain the changes. The soil in this part of the forest is firm, not prone to slides. Heavy storms can bend branches or fall trees, but they do not create new path shapes. Rangers who have walked these trails for decades say the land feels familiar, yet subtly changed each season. One ranger described it as rearranged in small ways. The trees grow in similar patterns, the rocks keep their places, yet the lines between them shift. In 2022, a visiting researcher named Dr. Miriam Keller studied navigation errors in forest landscapes. She walked Boundary Loop for 3 days, documenting tree spacing, soil firmness, and canopy density. In her notes, she wrote something unexpected: perception mismatch between map and ground. She tested her own path with chalk marks placed on tree trunks. On her second pass, 2 marks were missing, and 1 mark appeared higher than she remembered. She wrote, "Possible memory error, though sensation remains strange." Even search animals behave differently here. A handler during a 2018 search said her dog stopped several times, not to alert, but to reassess direction. The dog walked in small arcs, nose low, tail stiff. The handler described it as hesitation, like the dog couldn't decide which version of the trail to trust. These quiet shifts do not appear dramatic. They do not turn trails into mazes or create sudden obstacles. Instead, they appear in small changes, barely noticeable unless someone compares the land to maps, memory, or earlier steps. Rangers call them soft changes. They do not claim the trail moves. They only note that something about it refuses to stay still. The vanishing radio calls. The radio problems inside Montana's national park do not behave like normal signal loss. In most places, interference comes from steep ridges, thick tree canopies, or distance. But the interruptions that occur near the deeper interior, especially around the Western Basin and the narrow corridors by Boundary Loop, carry a different pattern. Rangers describe them as sudden, clean breaks. A voice will be mid-sentence, then vanish without static, distortion, or fade out. It is as if someone muted the transmission at the exact moment it left the speaker's mouth. These moments appear quietly in logs dating back several decades. They rarely attract attention on their own, but when placed side by side, they form a slow line of strange failures that do not follow known radio behavior. One of the earliest examples took place in 1982 during a trail survey. Ranger Paul Whitner made a standard call at 2:31 p.m. while checking a slope near Slate Wash. The recording shows the first half of his sentence clearly. Unit 4, heading down, then nothing. His voice cuts off mid-breath. The dispatcher asked for confirmation 3 times. Whitner responded only when he reached the lower ridge, saying he had been talking the entire time. He said he heard the dispatcher's replies, but the dispatcher heard nothing from him. The gap lasted 6 minutes. The audio file remains in the archives, labelled partial transmission. In 1999, a more detailed event was documented. A 4-person search team followed a trail near Basin 12 while looking for a missing hiker named Eric Dunn. One ranger, identified in the log as Unit Bravo 3, attempted to check in with base. His message recorded only the soft click of his radio button. No voice came through, but the 3 rangers with him later said they heard his voice clearly. They even answered him. When they reached the next checkpoint, the base crew said they had received no messages from Bravo 3 at all. In his written report, Bravo 3 wrote, "Radio worked for us, but not for them." During a 2007 backcountry rescue demonstration conducted before the park's summer season, trainers intentionally tested radio bands across multiple ridges. Most bands worked normally, but 2 channels cut out whenever the training group stepped near a cluster of thick pines west of North Elk Ridge. A technician running diagnostics wrote, "Signal strength normal, voice data loss unexplained." He ran a second test with the same result. The technician made a note that the signal indicators and the voice transmission did not match. The device claimed it was working, but no one could hear the voice. In 2014, a more unsettling incident occurred. Searchers looking for a missing teenager, Abigail Cross, moved through the lower basin. At 3:19 p.m., one ranger radioed, "We found." Then silence. The next 2 seconds of the recording show the background noise of the forest, but no voice. The ranger later said he had completed the sentence with the words, "a scrap of fabric," but those words do not appear on the recording. What stands out is that the ambient forest noise continued as normal. Only the voice itself vanished. Another ranger, in that same search, wrote an unusual side note. Heard reply from Unit 5, but recording shows no transmission. Unit 5 later confirmed that he did not speak during that time. The ranger who heard the voice said it was faint, as if it came from far away, but the tone was clear. Interview notes list the moment simply as non-matching audio perception. One of the clearest modern examples occurred in July 2019. A team surveying trail damage after heavy rainstorms walked near a narrow pass beside Granite Shadow Ridge. Ranger Eliza Hart attempted to update the base station. Her message recorded as "standing by test," then stopped. Hart insisted she had repeated the message 4 times, each time receiving her own echo back through the mic. But the recording device captured only 1 syllable. She wrote, "Heard my own voice return to me, but not to them." Her phrase became known among rangers as the "return without reach." Visitors have reported strange moments of radio silence as well, though their devices differ from ranger-grade radios. In 2020, a pair of hunters, named Lyle and Dawson Franks, described losing walkie-talkie contact while following a trail near Coldwater Bend. Dawson said he heard Lyle's voice shift from clear to muffled, then to nothing. Lyle said he continued speaking, unaware that Dawson could not hear him. Both devices showed signal strength at full bars. When they reunited an hour later, Dawson played back the voice clip saved on his device. The recording contained only a short fragment of Lyle's voice saying, "Stay on," then cutting off. During the 2021 search for backpacker Mia Lawson, Search logs show multiple attempts by rangers to coordinate from different ridge points. Several recordings share the same pattern: the click of the radio button, a tone of open channel, then nothing. The pauses are perfect silent gaps that do not include static. One ranger wrote, "Feels like someone cutting the voice out of the air." His comment was not included in the final report, but the audio file remains unchanged. Technicians from the State Office reviewed samples in 2022. Their summary listed the failures as non-standard. They confirmed that the missing audio could not be explained by natural interference. Wind, elevation, and vegetation can distort sound, but they do not remove the human voice while leaving background noise intact. The technicians tested radio models newer and older than those originally used. The failures continued in the same geographic pockets. Rangers working long-term assignments have grown used to these episodes. They do not attempt to explain them, but they verify that the pattern is consistent. A ranger, during a short interview, said, "You hear each other, but the forest doesn't let the voice travel." He said it calmly, the way someone describes a normal part of their work. The vanishing calls show no sign of stopping. They appear quietly in the logs across decades, tied loosely to ridges, basins, and narrow corridors. The voices start, then stop. The radios click, but nothing crosses the air. The land stays silent in ways that do not match any known condition. The searchers who walked into the mist. The mist that forms inside Montana's national park is not like normal fog. Rangers describe it as pale, thin, and strangely controlled. It rises in small patches rather than wide blankets, often settling low to the ground before lifting in narrow columns. Weather experts say there are no regular patterns of sudden fog formation in these regions, especially during the warmer months. Yet reports of isolated mist pockets appear again and again in search logs. These mists do not last long sometimes, only seconds, but they create moments where visibility drops so sharply that people vanish from sight even at close range. The earliest recorded mention traces back to 1979 during a search for a botanist named Alan Pierce. Two rangers walked along a shallow ravine when a thin cloud drifted across the trail. One ranger wrote, "Fog patch moved like a sheet, could not see my partner for several seconds." When the mist cleared, the partner stood only a few steps ahead, confused but unharmed. He said he had not seen the fog form. He said he felt a cold brush of air, and then everything returned to normal. During a 1995 trainee exercise, a group of new rangers practiced grid formation in a valley west of Boundary Loop. Midway through the drill, a mist formed around the last person in the line. The instructor said she watched him fade from view, as if he stepped behind a curtain. The mist lifted in less than 10 seconds. The trainee stood exactly where he had been, staring forward. When the instructor asked if he noticed the fog, he said he saw nothing but felt the air pull downward. His description appears in the trainee notes, but not in the final exercise summary. In 2006, a volunteer named Grace Holloway joined a search for a missing boy near Old Cedar Bend. She later told rangers that she lost sight of her partner for no more than 3 breaths. She said a patch of fog rolled across the trail. Her partner said he did not move. When the two compared notes later, both agreed on one detail. The forest went silent during the mist. Even insects seemed to stop. The stillness lasted until the fog dissolved. Holloway wrote, "Felt watched," but she crossed the word out in her statement before turning it in. Another incident came in 2013 during the search for a day hiker named Liam Frost. A ranger, beside a narrow pass, reported watching Frost's father, who had joined the search, step through a mist column that drifted across the slope. The father vanished from sight for about 8 seconds. When he reappeared, he asked why the ranger had stopped walking. The ranger said he had not moved at all. When audio of their interview was reviewed later, investigators noticed a strange detail. Frost's father paused mid-sentence in a way that did not match his breathing pattern. The audio held a 1-second gap, as if a moment of speech had been removed. The ranger speaking to him did not remember hearing any hesitation. Heavy cases appear in later years. In 2017, 3 firefighters assisting in an off-season search reported mist forming in 3 separate pockets within a single hour. One of them, a man named Tyler Baird, said he could barely see his own hand when he reached into the patch. He said the air inside felt colder and drier than the rest of the forest. When he stepped out, the mist was already gone. The others saw the fog, but each described its shape differently. One said it formed a small wall. Another said it curled like smoke. Their statements do not match, but all 3 claim the mist disappeared faster than normal evaporation could explain. Dogs react strongly to these mists. In 2018, during a search near Granite Shadow Ridge, a search dog named Marlowe froze at the edge of a fog column. The handler said Marlowe did not bark or pull, he simply refused to cross. His tail lowered and his ears flattened. When the mist lifted, Marlowe moved forward again, but he kept glancing back at the spot where the fog had been. The handler wrote, "Behavior unusual, not fear, avoidance." In 2020, a hiker reported seeing what she called a pillar of fog rising straight up from the ground. She described its shape as narrow and smooth, like a rope of cloud. She watched it drift upward until it thinned out and vanished. When rangers reached her location, the air was clear. A portable weather unit showed no humidity spike. The wind conditions did not support any sudden vertical rise of moisture. Her description matches similar accounts from earlier decades, though no file directly links them. One ranger's experience in 2021 stands out for its clarity. During a low-visibility search at dusk, he saw a fellow ranger walk through a small fog bank that had rolled in from the creek. The ranger disappeared for 4 seconds. When he reappeared, he said he had walked in a straight line without slowing. He did not notice anything unusual, except that the air felt thick, like stepping through wool. The 2 later checked their watches. The timestamps did not match. One ranger's watch was 6 seconds ahead of the others. Both insisted they had synchronized their watches before the search began. These moments are not dramatic. They do not create storms, nor do they shift with any known weather pattern. They appear quietly, without warning. They lift just as quickly. They do not leave traces on the ground, on clothing, or in the air. What they interrupt is sight. What they disturb is the sense of distance between people. Rangers say the mist does not move like normal fog. They say it moves as though it knows where to go. They do not mark these comments in official reports, yet the same phrasing appears in personal notes and spoken interviews. A ranger once said, "It rolls in straight, it rolls out straight, never sideways." He said it calmly, not as a warning but as something he had accepted. These fog pockets appear in almost every major disappearance record in the park. Sometimes before the missing person vanishes, sometimes after, sometimes at the exact moment search teams lose sight of each other. The mist comes, blocks the view, then goes. Nothing else changes, yet everything does. The footprints that begin but do not end. Footprints are one of the simplest tools in a search. They tell direction, weight, pace, and sometimes emotion. A hurried step looks different from a careful one. A shift in depth can show if someone carried extra weight or paused. But inside certain areas of Montana's national park, footprints often appear in ways that do not follow normal patterns. They begin clearly, then end suddenly, with no sign of scattering, slipping, or turning back. Rangers have documented these strange prints for decades, usually in the quiet spaces between official lines, margin notes, verbal briefings, and clipped remarks tucked inside field logs. They follow no single shape or season. but the pattern of disappearance fits the same slow rhythm found throughout the park. The earliest known record dates to 1974 during the search for a man named William Carter. Carter hiked alone near Alder Ridge. When he failed to return, rangers followed a faint boot track along a dry creek bed. The ground was soft enough to record precise detail. The prints formed a straight, steady line for nearly half a mile. Then, without any sign of breakage or disturbance, they ended. The soil ahead was undisturbed. No drag marks, no leap, no sign of weight shift. One ranger wrote quietly in the notes, "Track ceases on flat ground." The official summary did not include that sentence. In 1991, during a late autumn search for a woman named Krista Myers, a team found her footprints moving along a narrow corridor of pine needles. Her steps were calm and evenly spaced. The prints showed clear heel and toe impressions, the kind made by someone walking at a normal pace. Then, less than a foot from the next expected print, the markings disappeared. A ranger, kneeling over the spot, ran his hand across the ground, trying to detect a shift in texture. He felt only smooth, undisturbed needles. The team circled the area for hours, searching for any sign of a continued path, but the forest remained still. In his personal notebook, the ranger wrote, "Trail dissolves." Another unusual case occurred in 2003 during the search for two brothers, Jared and Nolan White. Rangers followed their tracks to a stretch of soft ground beside Coldwater Bend. The prints belonged to two people walking side by side. The brothers' steps were clear and deep enough to show the pattern of their hiking boots. The trail continued until the edge of a small, flat clearing. There, the older brother's prints ended. Only the younger brother's prints continued for 3 more steps, then stopped as well. A search dog circled the area in slow, confused arcs. The handler later wrote, "Dog unsettled, no direction chosen." In 2010, a team searching for a missing photographer discovered another strange imprint. The footprint belonged to the missing man based on size and tread forensic techs, confirmed it later from his spare shoes found in his vehicle. This print was located near the banks of a slow, shallow stream. The print showed a clean, detailed outline, including the edges of the tread. The next expected print should have been several inches ahead. Instead, the ground was smooth. The water had not risen recently. The leaf litter was untouched. A ranger leaned over and whispered, as recorded by a body cam. "It's like he stepped into clear air." The 2017 disappearance of hiker Megan Klein includes a particularly detailed footprint record. Klein's prints were easy to follow because she wore distinctive boots with triangular tread marks. Rangers followed the prints through a length of compact dirt, then across a spread of soft moss. The moss showed every step, then it did not. One print stood alone at the edge of the moss patch. The next step forward was missing. The missing mark did not show compression, rebound, or any disturbance. The moss looked untouched. A field tech performed a depth test and wrote, "Surface even, no restoration possible without force." That meant something should have bent the moss if she stepped there, yet it had no record of pressure. Rangers also note the lack of secondary signs. A missing footprint normally comes with clues: a broken twig, a shifted rock, compressed grass. But many of these cases show nothing around the vanished tracks. The ground looks preserved, as if the person took their next step somewhere above the normal surface of the forest floor. Animals leave similar signs. In 2018, during a wildlife monitoring session, biologist Ian Mercer found the tracks of a deer moving along a ridge. The animal's prints were steady until the edge of a small depression. There, the tracks ended. Mercer waited to see if the deer had turned and doubled back, but the return prints never appeared. The ridge was too narrow for a sudden side movement. He later wrote, Animal track ends without exit. The note was not part of any disappearance, yet his description matched human cases in the same region. A particularly unsettling event occurred in 2020, when two rangers, tracking a missing camper, found a set of footprints that began rather than ended. They appeared in the middle of a shallow field of dust. The prints did not continue behind them. Instead, they formed a short line of 4 steps, beginning out of nowhere and ending 10 feet later. The ranger who measured them said the first print was the deepest, as if the person arrived with more force than they left. His report included a small underline under the words "print appears from height." Search dogs consistently react the same way to these vanished tracks. They approach the final print, sniff, then pause. They do not commit to a direction. In 2021, a handler wrote, "Dog circles, no lead chosen." The dogs behave as though the trail is unfinished, like a sentence missing its last words. In recent years, rangers have begun marking these spots on internal maps with small dots. They call them dead stops. No one uses the term officially, but the phrase spreads quietly among the staff. A dead stop is a point where tracks of any kind, human or animal, end without explanation. There are now dozens of these points across the interior, forming loose patterns near ridges, basins, and shifting trail corridors. The dead stops do not align with terrain, elevation, weather, or known hazards. The footprints do not tell a story. They do not hint at struggle or panic. They simply stop in calm, ordinary positions, as though the next step was taken somewhere else, a step the ground does not remember. The night the forest fell silent. Rangers who have worked in Montana's national park for decades say that silence is normal in the deep backcountry. Sometimes the wind drops, sometimes animals settle, but there are rare nights recorded in scattered logs stretching back nearly 50 years when the forest goes silent in a way that does not match weather, season, or behavior. These silences are complete. No birds, no insects, no branches shifting, no distant creek noise. Rangers describe it as a sudden flattening of the world, as if something pressed down on the entire valley at once. These events usually last only seconds, but the timing of many of them aligns with missing person reports either moments before a disappearance is discovered or just after someone fails to respond during a routine check-in. The earliest note comes from 1,973 inches, a ranger journal, long before digital records became standard. A ranger named Douglas Wade wrote, "Night fell silent for what felt like one long breath. He was camping near Slate Ridge while tracking a group of college hikers. The next morning, one member of the group failed to return to camp. The disappearance was attributed to disorientation at the time, but Wade's remark stands out: silence came first." In 1986, a more precise record appeared. A ranger station near Boundary Loop maintained a small analog sound meter to detect wildlife movement at night. The device captured a 5-second gap at 2:03 a.m., in which ambient noise dropped to its lowest measurable point, lower than typical nighttime drop-offs. No wind was recorded. Yet just after the gap, the sound meter spiked briefly with a sharp return of insects, almost as if they resumed activity at the same moment. A handwritten note on the meter log reads, "Odd dip, wildlife synchronized." That same morning, a campsite less than a mile away was found abandoned. The missing hiker was not recovered. The silence was recorded again in 1998, this time during a search for 2 trail runners who became separated at dusk. A ranger team positioned on a flat overlook reported that the forest noise shut off in a clean drop. One ranger described the moment as like a switch cut the sound. His partner said he could feel the shift before hearing it, describing it as a tightness in the air. Their third partner, who had been walking a few paces ahead, did not hear the silence at all. This mismatch some rangers experiencing the event, while others do not, has been noted in several other accounts. The trail runners were never found. A more detailed account appears in a 2004 body mic recording. A ranger radioed that he was approaching a small clearing near Old Cedar Bend. His voice sounds normal, calm, almost monotone. Then, in the background, all forest noise stops. The recording captures the absence clearly. His boots crunch on the ground, but the forest itself becomes empty. He pauses and whispers, "It's quiet." 2 seconds later, the forest sounds return as abruptly as they left. He continues speaking, unaware that anything unusual occurred. Later, he said, he remembered the silence, but thought it was a momentary change in wind. His recorded whisper proves the effect was real to at least one of his senses. In 2013, searchers looking for a lost scavenger hunter encountered a similar event. A volunteer named Janine Cole reported that the air pulled thin before the silence began. She said she felt the change in her chest more than in her ears. She stated that the silence lasted long enough for her to look around and realize she could not even hear her own breathing clearly. Her partner, only steps away, said he heard everything normally and never noticed a drop. The search that followed found the scavenger hunter's backpack, but not the man himself. Even wildlife seems aware of these moments. In 2017, during an early evening patrol near Granite Shadow Ridge, a ranger observed a herd of deer freeze in place one instant before the silence began. Their heads raised, their bodies stiffened, then the forest sound vanished. The silence lasted 4 seconds. When normal noise returned, the deer scattered in multiple directions. The ranger noted, "Deer anticipated silence." It was one of the few entries in the logs that attempted to mark a sequence of cause and effect. A particularly strange event occurred in 2020. A group of seasonal workers was setting new markers near Wolfspine Bend when the forest went silent without warning. All 4 workers noticed it. The drop was so sharp that one worker dropped her gear in surprise. Another described the moment as stepping into the blank part of an audio track. One worker timed the silence on her watch. 5 seconds exactly. When sound returned, it came back all at once, not gradually. One worker said the insects woke up together. Hours later, a call came in reporting a missing solo camper only a short distance from that same bend. Technicians who have reviewed recordings of these silences say they resemble a sudden broad-spectrum drop in ambient noise, not a fade caused by wind or temperature. It is as if multiple sources of sound cut off simultaneously. No natural event behaves this way. Even sudden predator alerts among animals do not silence wind or creaks. Rangers have learned to pay attention when the forest falls silent. One veteran said in a recorded conversation, "The quiet here doesn't warn you, it just arrives." Some rangers quicken their pace when the silence appears, others stop moving until sound returns. There is no official procedure, only personal habits formed by repeating encounters with something they cannot explain. The silence is not constant. It does not come every night or even every season. It arrives in brief, contained bursts, like a missing frame in a long film. But those missing frames almost always sit close to places where trails shift, radios fail, footprints end, and hikers are never found. The silence does not announce itself. It simply takes the sound away, then gives it back. The shapes seen between trees. The descriptions of shapes in Montana's national park are always brief. They appear in side comments, in lines scratched into notebooks, or in the quiet statements rangers make only when asked directly. These shapes do not move in obvious ways. They do not chase, step forward, or break branches. They remain still, distant, and always half covered by trees. Yet they appear in accounts spanning more than 40 years. Each one is short, only a few seconds long, but consistent enough to form a quiet pattern that sits alongside the disappearances, the silences, and the vanishing tracks. The earliest known reference comes from 1981. A ranger named Timothy Hall reported seeing a tall figure standing between two old cedars near Slate Ridge. He wrote that it remained still, as though carved from wood. When he walked closer, the space between the trees was empty. He wrote only 5 words in the margin of his log: "Gone when reached the gap." He later said he believed the figure was a trick of shadow, but the certainty in his handwriting suggests hesitation. In 1989, during a routine wildlife count, biologist Karen Modes appeared to witness something similar. She noted a pale vertical shape near the tree line across a clearing. Her description said it was slimmer than a person and taller than a buck. Modes wrote that it did not appear to breathe or sway, even though the wind moved the surrounding branches. When she looked down to adjust her binoculars, the shape was gone. She said she never heard movement. No branches snapped, no brush parted. The clearing stayed quiet, and she walked away unsure of what she had seen. A more unusual account appears in 1997 during a search for a missing hiker named John Nolan. A volunteer, a man named Reed Turner, said he saw a grey, smooth figure standing far up the ridge. He believed it was another searcher. When he raised his arm to signal, the figure did not respond. He said it looked like someone in light clothing, but the head shape seemed too narrow. When the team walked toward the location, they found only trees. Turner repeated his description several times, always calm, never dramatic. In his statement, he added, "It watched, then was no longer there." Sightings grew more detailed in the early 2000s. In 2002, a father and daughter hiking near Granite Shadow Ridge reported seeing a tall, unmoving shape between 2 pines at dusk. The daughter said it looked like a person but stretched. The father said its surface looked smooth, not like clothing or skin. Both said it blended into the dim light in a way that was hard to focus on. When they stepped closer, the figure seemed to thin out. That phrase appears in the ranger's notes exactly as spoken. Thinned out like narrowing air. In 2009, a searcher working the lower basin described a darker figure. He called it a shadow standing upright. He believed it was a trick of evening light until he noticed that the shadow stood in a spot where no tree stood tall enough to cast it. He watched it for several seconds. When he blinked, the shadow was gone. He later said it did not vanish. It stopped being there. He crossed out that line in his report, then wrote a more neutral description, but the crossed out sentence is still readable. In 2015, a group of wildlife photographers staying near Old Cedar Bend saw what they believed was a large animal standing in the distance. One photographer captured a blurry image. The photo shows a long, narrow shape beside a stand of spruce. Its edges seem too straight for an animal, but not quite even like a tree trunk. The photographer said the figure stood out by standing too still. Rangers reviewed the location and found nothing unusual. No broken branches, no indentations. The ground was smooth. A ranger's account from 2018 is one of the most unsettling. She said she saw a pale form between 2 fir trees while following a set of partial tracks. She described it as still as stone, with no visible features, no face, no clothing texture, no limbs defined clearly, just a tall column-like form. She said she blinked once, and the figure seemed closer, not much, just a few feet. She closed her eyes again, thinking she was fatigued. When she opened them, the shape was gone. She wrote in her notes, "Forest felt heavier afterward." In 2020, 2 hikers reported seeing something tall while crossing a narrow pass at dusk. The person in front described it as a stretched shape. The person behind saw only a flicker of pale colour. When they compared descriptions later, both agreed the figure had no movement and no sound. They also agreed The forest felt unusually quiet during the moment, not silent, but muted. Their report ended with the line, "It stood like it was waiting." These sightings rarely last long enough for identification. They do not repeat in the same exact spots, yet they appear along the same corridors, near shifting trails, near vanished footprints, near pockets of sudden silence. Rangers avoid speculation, but some admit privately that the shapes might be connected to whatever causes the patterns in this park. One ranger said during a camera test, not realizing the mic was live, if it wanted to be seen, it would step forward. The shapes do not step forward. They appear only in stillness and vanish in stillness. They leave no sound behind, no tracks, no sign of presence. They stand between trees as if they belong there, then disappear as though the forest closes around them. People see them only once and never close. The cases that match too closely. The individual disappearance reports inside Montana's national park often look simple on their own. A hiker goes missing near a ridge. A camper fails to return to camp. A backpacker's last known position is recorded on a phone that suddenly loses signal. Each case, taken alone, has explanations tied to nature missteps, disorientation, weather shifts. But when the reports are placed side by side, spaced across decades, certain details repeat with a precision that feels unusually quiet and controlled. Rangers who have worked long enough to see multiple cases say the patterns do not spread randomly across the map. They form echoes of each other, separated by years, yet nearly identical in timing, location, and the last movements of the missing. One of the earliest matching cases appears between 1978 and 1994. In 1978, a hiker named Lyle Morgan vanished near the mouth of Basin 12. His final track showed a single boot print at the edge of a moss patch, with no continuation. 16 years later, in 1994, a man named Robert Hensley disappeared only a short distance from Morgan's last known spot. Hensley's tracks ended in almost the exact same way. One clear print, then nothing ahead. Both disappearances occurred in June. Both happened under clear skies. Both men wrote short, confident entries in trail logs that morning. The ranger who compared the two cases wrote, "Ending points match within 40 yards. He underlined the sentence, then added no theory. Two other cases mirror one another with eerie symmetry. In 1985, a pair of hikers reported hearing a sudden drop in forest noise moments before one of them disappeared briefly behind a ridge, only to reappear disoriented but alive. In 2017, a similar event occurred, but this time the missing person did not return. A college student named Erin Pace walked ahead on a flat trail, sent her final message at 10:41 a.m., then vanished at a point where the forest went silent for several seconds. Her companion said the quiet felt pressed. The man from the 1985 case described the silence with the exact same word, pressed. These statements appear decades apart in different handwriting, yet the phrasing is identical. Another matched pair sits between 1991 and 2010. In 1991, searchers following the path of missing hiker Krista Myers found her footprints ending at the edge of a pine corridor. In 2010, searchers found the tracks of a missing photographer ending in the same manner, a final step pressed into the soil, followed by untouched earth. Both tracks faced northwest. Both sets ended on calm weather days. Both searches took place in early October. The ranger who worked on the 2010 case wrote in his notes, identical track ending to 91. He circled the year, but did not include the comparison in his formal report. A particularly striking match appears between the reports from 2002 and 2020. In 2002, a father and daughter hiking near Granite Shadow Ridge saw a tall, pale shape thinning out between trees. In 2020, a pair of hikers crossing a pass just a few hundred yards away saw a similar figure described as a stretched shape standing motionless between pines. Both sightings occurred at dusk. Both lasted less than 5 seconds. Both were followed by unusual muting of forest sound. The 2002 hikers said their voices sounded dull. The 2020 hikers said the air felt muffled. When rangers interviewed the later pair, one ranger quietly said, "This has been said before. Even cases separated by decades mirror each other down to small, strange details." In 1983, a missing camper's stove was found unused in a tent with everything neatly placed. In 2003, a missing couple's gear was found the same way, zipped, organized, untouched. Both tents faced east. Both sites sat near silent pockets documented earlier by search teams. The ranger who processed the 2003 site noted, "Layout identical to 83 case." His supervisor crossed the line out before filing the public summary. Radio failures also follow near-matching patterns. In 1982, a ranger's voice cut out mid-sentence while he said, "Unit 4, heading down." In 2014, a ranger's voice vanished mid-sentence during a similar call in nearly the same area. He began with the words, "We found," before the transmission ended abruptly. The recordings, played side by side, show the same clean break, no static, no fade, just absence. One technician compared the two files and wrote, "Pattern consistent across years." The note never entered official circulation. Some cases match even more closely. In 1999, a volunteer saw a tall, smooth figure on a ridge during the search for Eric Dunn. In 2021, a ranger saw a similar unmoving shape in nearly the same ridge gap during a search for a missing camper. Both witnesses described the figure as upright, still, and gone on blink. Both statements contain the same three concepts even though they were made 22 years apart. These parallels continue into smaller details. In 1976, a missing man's last recorded entry in the ranger log was a quick 2-word note, "Ridge look." In 2019, missing student Erin Pace wrote a short, abrupt message. "Signal keeps. The rest failed to send." The structure 2 words, cut short, appears only in these 2 cases, 43 years apart. Even weather lines repeat. In 1988, the sky over Wolfspine Bend was overcast but stable when a hiker vanished. In 2016, another hiker disappeared under a nearly identical sky, according to weather records. 52 degrees, grey cover, no precipitation, light wind from the west. The search logs for both entries include the same sentence. Light grey horizon at time of last sighting. 2 different rangers wrote those lines decades apart. Rangers who compare the older and newer files privately admit the similarities sit too close to be random. But none of these patterns appear in public summaries. The files are written in calm tones, clipped phrasing, and straightforward facts. Nothing dramatic, nothing speculative. The matching details remain scattered, one in a margin, one in a note, one in an interview transcript, one in a discarded draft. Every time a new disappearance is logged, at least one ranger quietly checks an old file to see if the details match another case. Most of the time, they do. The patterns do not explain anything. They only line up cleanly and quietly, one case beside another. The places the maps keep changing. The maps of Montana's national park are meant to remain consistent. Trees grow, streams shift slightly, but the land itself, the ridges, the basins, the long corridors of pine, should stay still. Yet certain areas inside the park appear differently from year to year, even when no landslide, fire, or weather event explains the shift. These changes are small at first glance: a bend drawn a few degrees off, a ridgeline placed slightly farther east, a trailhead moved by a short margin. But over decades, these quiet inconsistencies form a pattern that cartographers and longtime rangers have noticed, though rarely discuss openly. One of the earliest map anomalies occurred in 1975. A park cartographer named Elaine Crawford drafted a terrain outline for the area near Basin 7. When she compared her survey notes to a map printed 4 years earlier, she noticed that a small ridge, roughly 200 yards long, appeared shifted by nearly 30 feet. No significant geological events had been recorded in that period. Crawford wrote a note in the margin: possible early measurement error. She underlined the phrase twice, as though convincing herself rather than documenting fact. But her field measurements were precise, and later surveys confirmed that her outline matched the ground. The older map, not her new one, was the anomaly. In the 1,980 seconds, similar irregularities appeared in new editions of visitor maps. A ranger named Maurice Tanner noticed that the trail lines near Wolf Spine Bend had moved slightly between the 1,981 and 1,986 prints. The trail, which should have been fixed, now curved in a softer arc. Tanner walked the path himself, expecting to find new erosion or trail rerouting. Instead, he found the land unchanged. In his notes he wrote, "Map does not match soil, ground constant." The trail he walked was the same one he remembered from years earlier. The map had shifted, not the land. By 1992, cartographers began using early GPS devices to improve accuracy. Yet even with GPS support, the discrepancy persisted. A technician named Laura Bell compared raw coordinate logs from field teams with the final printed maps. She discovered that some GPS points were relocated slightly on the finished layouts, usually by small distances, rarely more than a few dozen feet. Bell assumed a formatting error, but when she contacted the team responsible for the layout, they told her that the points were translated exactly as received. Her printed map showed a slight gap that did not exist on the ground. She wrote in her personal notebook, "Data shifts between field and final." She never included this line in the official report. In 2001, another strange occurrence came to light. A seasonal worker named Daniel Ortiz, who had walked Boundary Loop countless times, noticed that the printed map he used for guiding hikers no longer showed a minor ridge spur that he knew existed. The spur was small, just a narrow rise, but it was a familiar feature. When he returned to the spot on foot, the spur was still there. Rocks, trees, and slope unchanged. But when he checked new maps the following season, the spur had reappeared, drawn in a slightly different position than before. Ortiz mentioned it to another ranger, who told him quietly, "That area never stays the same on paper." Map inconsistencies continued into the late 2000s. A 2007 internal map of the northwest sector shows a thin creek line that bends right near Granite Shadow Ridge. In the 2013 map, the same creek bends left. When hydrologists investigated the area, they found the water following a straight path with no sign of recent diversion. The map had shifted the creek, not the creek itself. A hydrologist wrote, "Cartographic drift," in the review notes, but the comment was dismissed as a simple drafting oversight. Then came 2015, when a detailed geospatial map was published for search teams. It displayed a narrow corridor between two ridges that created a triangle-shaped depression. Some searchers used this map during the hunt for missing hiker Abigail Cross. Months later, the updated version removed the depression entirely, replacing it with a flat contour. The two ridges remained, but their spacing had changed slightly. The depression no longer existed on paper, even though several searchers had walked through it. One ranger insisted, "We camped in that depression." Another ranger, who reviewed the updated map, said, "It couldn't have been deep enough to show. Their statements did not match." The depression remained unmentioned in the final summary. In 2018, cartographer Eleanor Briggs revisited her earlier work near Basin 12. She used advanced satellite data to refine the contours. When she compared her new rendering with the terrain markings from a 1990 hand-drawn map, she found a repeating mismatch in the same location, a slight eastward drift of the ridgeline and a narrowing of the lower corridor. Briggs wrote a 2-sentence note: "Inconsistency stable over decades. Unknown cause." She did not submit the note to supervisors. She inserted it between pages of her private sketchbook instead. Certain maps show changes to the same areas every few years. The inside bend of Coldwater Bend shifts subtly between editions, sometimes broadening, sometimes tightening. The trail approach to North Elk Ridge shortens and lengthens in cycles. The boundary between Basin 12 and Basin 13 varies by small increments. These alterations are quiet, almost unnoticeable, unless someone overlays the maps from multiple years and traces the differences by hand. Some rangers have done exactly that. One ranger, who preferred not to attach his name to the notes, layered 5 decades of maps on a glass table. He reported that certain lines, ridges, trail curves, creek bends wandered back and forth, not drastically, but with a kind of slow movement that felt out of place for terrain that should be immovable. He wrote, "Lines drift over time." Next to the line he added, "Not errors, patterns." More recent cases bring the inconsistencies into disappearance investigations. In 2020, search teams followed a coordinate shared through a digital map used by hikers. When they reached the site, they found the terrain slightly different from the digital representation. The ridge stretched farther west than expected. A volunteer said, "Map felt wrong by just enough to matter." A ranger checked the official topographic sheet and found it matched neither the digital version nor the ground exactly. He mentioned this to a supervisor who replied, "That area has never been clean." It is not unusual for maps to contain minor errors, especially in remote terrain. But the repeating pattern, the same lines shifting, the same spots changing shape, suggests something else. The maps do not drift in random directions. They drift around specific places, the acoustic basins, the dead stop footprints, the shifting trails, the silent ridges, the same zones where people vanish. Rangers do not call these map changes supernatural. They do not speculate in their reports. Instead, they treat the inconsistencies as quiet reminders that certain areas do not stay fixed on paper, just as they do not stay fixed in memory. They say the land stays the same underfoot, but the lines that represent it refuse to hold still. The final pattern that no one will name. Across Montana's national park, the disappearances follow no single explanation, no weather event, no animal behavior, no geological shift that repeats predictably. Yet when every detail from the past chapters is placed quietly beside the others, a slow, steady pattern begins to form. It does not point to a conclusion. It does not explain itself. It simply appears, the way a faint outline rises beneath thin paper when pressed from below. Rangers who have worked here the longest say they feel the pattern more than they see it. They say it shows itself only in the repetition of small things that do not belong together, yet always end up sharing the same ground. The first part of this pattern involves time. Many disappearances occur in short windows, quiet morning hours, when the sun has not yet lifted above the ridges, or late afternoon when the air cools and sound moves strangely. Rangers note that some cases occur minutes before dusk, just as the forest moves into its slowest hour. The logs show multiple last sightings recorded between 4:50 and 5:30 p.m. across decades. Some of these times appear written in hurried pen strokes, as if the ranger sensed something important in the timing. No one states the significance directly, but the clustering is unmistakable. The second part involves the land itself. Certain geographic points appear again and again: Basin 12's quiet pockets, the soft corridors of Wolf's Spine Bend, the narrow ridge near Granite Shadow, the shifting line of Boundary Loop. Footprints, radio cuts, sudden mists, and sightings of unmoving shapes all return to these places. Even the map inconsistencies cluster around them, as though the land does not want to be drawn cleanly. These areas sit like knots in a piece of fabric, small points where the threads tighten, pulling everything else around them. Then there is the matter of the last movements recorded. Across dozens of cases, the final actions are calm. The missing person writes a short message, takes a steady step, sets down a pack, photographs a ridge, or simply stops to look at something ahead. Rangers note the absence of struggle. Items are found untouched. Camps are orderly. Radios cut mid-sentence, but never during a moment of fear. It is as if the land waits for stillness, taking people only when they are quiet, never when they run. Many cases also share a detail that rarely appears in official summaries: a sense of presence. A ranger writes, "Felt watched." A volunteer notes pressure in the air. A biologist reports forest went flat. These comments look small in the margins, but placed together, they create a shape, not a physical one, but a behavioral outline. The land does not move, but something within it reacts to sound, timing, and stillness, not aggressively, not loudly, only with slow responses that match the forest's quietness. Another thread in this pattern is the silence that arrives suddenly and completely. The forest drops into stillness for 3, 4, or 5 seconds at a time, often moments before or after someone disappears. These silences occur in different years, different seasons, yet always in the same handful of locations. They are recorded on meters, whispered about in radio calls, and mentioned by rangers who insist they cannot fully describe the sensation. It is not just lack of sound. It is the removal of sound, as though something presses the noise out of the valley for a brief moment. And then there are the shapes. Tall, pale, still. Thin as shadows, yet visible enough for multiple people across decades to describe in similar words. They do not move closer when approached. They do not retreat. They appear only at the edges of vision, always between trees, always motionless. Rangers note that the forest grows quieter when these shapes appear. Volunteers who witness them describe a feeling that the space around them becomes heavier, as if distance folds slightly. When all of these elements are placed together, a quiet rhythm forms: shifting trails, disappearing echoes, footprints that end without continuation, gentle mists that erase sight, and maps that cannot decide where the ground begins or ends. The events repeat, not randomly, but in clusters like scattered constellations that form a picture only when someone finally steps back far enough to see the shape between the stars. Rangers who have worked in the park for more than 20 years never name the pattern directly. They say the land changes, but only in certain ways. They say people vanish, but only in certain places. They say the forest grows still, but only when something chooses to be near. When asked what that something might be, they do not answer. Some shake their heads, some remain quiet. A few look toward the ridge lines as though waiting for a sound that never returns. In 2022, a ranger sorting decades of case logs placed 7 folders on a desk. Each folder represented disappearances spanning different years. When she opened them, the details from each stack settled into loose alignment: the same time of day, the same quiet pockets, the same final steps, the same missing echoes, the same thin mists. the same unmoving shapes, the same points on maps that refuse to stay still. The ranger wrote only one sentence at the bottom of the page, too close to be random. Then she closed the binder and did not file the sentence anywhere else. The pattern does not explain the disappearances. It does not point to a cause or offer a clear line to follow. It simply repeats calmly, quietly, across the ridges and basins of the park. Rangers feel it before they see it. Searchers notice it only when they map the gaps. The land records it without speaking. No one names the pattern. No one claims to understand it. It is simply there, waiting in the stillness where the trails fade, the echoes die, and the forest holds its breath. As you've seen, the disappearances in this corner of Montana do not follow a clear path. They form small patterns, scattered across the ridges, basins, and deep corridors of the forest. Rangers do not offer theories. They simply document what they find: the sudden silences, the missing echoes, the shifting trails, the footprints that end with no return. These details remain as quiet reminders that the land here holds more questions than answers. If you want to follow more investigations into places just like this, parks with long histories, missing cases, strange environmental data, and unexplained patterns, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with others who want to explore these mysteries. Your support helps us continue uncovering what sits just behind the quiet edges of the map.